I could justify for years and years. I could tell myself that all the things that are happening around me and every situation that I choose to be in, all the negativity, I can justify that and say, that's okay. It's not a problem. It's just the way that my life is going to be. And I could accept it and I could convince myself of that in hundreds of ways until one day everything hits the fan.
What if the biggest obstacle to your leadership success isn't your strategy, your experience, or even your personality? What if it's your behavior? Today, we're diving into a conversation that every executive, business owner, and emerging leader needs to hear. Because the truth is, the behaviors that help you become successful can also become the very behaviors that limit your influence, create resistance, and quietly erode trust within your team. Our guest this week is Debbie Longo, an executive behavioral coach, speaker, and podcast host with more than 24 years of experience helping leaders transform the behaviors that drive communication, accountability, performance, and business results. In this episode, we'll unpack why behavior, not personality, is the real predictor of leadership effectiveness, the hidden habits that unintentionally push people away, and how to build accountability without creating fear, micromanagement, and burnout. We're challenging what it really takes to lead with greater intention, stronger influence, and lasting impact. Debbie, welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
I read something in regards to the work that you do that it said that a lot of individuals in the workplace, they look at each other around their personality as opposed to their behaviors. We don't spend enough time really focusing on behavior or we attribute it to their personality. Can you help us understand, well, one, that focus that you put on your work in regards to behaviors, but also distinguishing between those two?
Really, how I started my career is as a life coach, and now I'm doing executive coaching or business coaching, and it's more focused on behavior. And personality and behavior are two different things completely. And a lot of people don't know that. They think it's the same thing. So, one general explanation would be that in anything, the mind controls the body and the mind controls what we do physically and mentally. So if I want to be on this podcast, I have a thought. I'm going to be on the podcast and then I go on it. If I think it and I don't go on it, then it's just a thought. It's not turned into an action. So it really doesn't mean anything until they take that thought and turn it into an action. There's a lot of things that I think that I don't act on, two different things. So the idea is, and this is just with anything, you could insert whatever you want. You could insert your job, your boss, your family, your spouse, it doesn't matter. I can change my mindset, okay? And I could take my thinking and make it completely different. That's called changing your mindset and going on a different path. And then when I do that, now my behavior changes. And again, this is just one example, okay? So now when my behavior changes, my thinking is going to be different. And now I'm going to make different decisions. And now I'm going to act in a different way than I used to do.
Is it something similar to the effect of if you're not in a good state of mind, and therefore I always happen to think about myself, I get up in the morning and if I put my 2 feet on the ground and I'm not in a good state of mind, I don't want to necessarily walk that much further into my day because that mindset is going to come with me. So then what I do is I get myself course corrected. So then I go out with a whole different mindset, which then changes, to your point, it changes my behavior, it changes my actions, it changes my decision making. Is that similar to what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly the way that one example of how it works. But you were able to see that what the next thing that was going to happen was negative or is not going to benefit you or was going to hurt you, was going to do whatever. But you saw that you didn't want that. So you had that little vision or think it through or think in advance or whatever. And you didn't want that. So then you changed your thinking. you shifted your thinking to a different way by
Right.
saying, I don't want to do that, or this is not going to benefit me, or I could do this instead. And this is a positive thing. And if I do the other thing that I was going to do, that's a negative thing. And I don't want to do that. And what we call that is cancel. Okay. Or delete. If you have a document, you press delete on the computer. Okay. You want to delete the word. And this
Right.
is exactly what you're doing with your brain. I like to say cancel. That's just a word that I use because everybody seems to love it. So this is what we want to do. And you could do that in any way. Okay. It doesn't matter. You're just changing your thinking from thinking one way to another. But we want to change a lot in the person. You're just saying one thing. And that's great that you gave that example. But the idea is everything in their life literally changed only because that changed.
However, you can't do everything all at once. So what do you see? What's a client example as to how that is coached and implemented? What is the behavior that they're demonstrating that then you need to help them shift and move into a different direction?
Did you ever hear of everybody has to have a bottom? Now,
Yes.
not a good situation to be
No,
in.
no.
And I don't want to see anybody in that
Right.
situation. Extremely common because I could justify for years and years. I could tell myself that all the things that are happening around me and every situation that I choose to be in, all the negativity, I can justify that and say, that's okay. It's not a problem. It's just the way that my life is going to be. And I could accept it and I could convince myself of that in hundreds of ways until one day everything hits the fan. The result of that is my bottom. And now I have to do something. Okay. And maybe somebody got a divorce. Maybe somebody lost their house. Maybe an individual lost a job, like an executive job or something like that. Something where they really think that they really need to change and they need to do something that's not going to, they can't stay on the path that they're on. And they know this because they have this bottom. And then we change that thing. And that thing is not the only thing that changes. And that's how it works. And then
Right.
once you change your mindset and your thinking and all this stuff, then it's going to carry over with every single thing you do. And that's how it gets changed. And that's a process. For some people, it could be a month. For some people, it could be years. Depends on the process, what we do, and all that. So it depends on a lot of things.
It's funny you should say that. Do you get hit with this would now be coming from your client's manager or boss or maybe the HR person where they don't really fully understand the coaching process and therefore they think that these behavioral changes that we're talking about can happen in a very short period of time. And yet, like you say, that it actually does take time and sometimes it takes months and even years. Do you run into that?
All the time. And like I said, there's all different situations. The person could be in a situation like that for a very long time, or not necessarily. They could say, oh, this situation's probably not going to work out for me. And then they know they have that mindset, they have that insight before actually everything hits the fan. We don't want it to get to that situation, but there is a lot that's going to happen here. And that is what I always tell my clients and friends and everybody. I'm just going to prepare you. This is the plan. I lay out everything. And then I just want to this is the deal. This is what's going on. And usually they don't know. They don't know because I go deep into it. So they don't know the conversation. They don't know what's been going on with them for X amount of years or whatever the situation is or whatever the justification is or whatever we're talking about. And they don't know that until somebody tells them. And that doesn't always work out because now the person's going to say, oh, this person told me or Debbie told me that this is my issue and I need to do this and this. And I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to bother. Okay, that's their choice. That's the individual's choice. That's not mine. You're going to go back into your own way, into your own negativity, and you're going to get the same results. You either want to change it or not. Just go with blind faith. You don't have
Right.
to trust me. This stuff happens right away. You don't
Yeah.
wait, not everything, but you'll start to see progress right away. This is how I do it. It doesn't take time,
So that contradicts what you said earlier, that it could take time and it could.
the process.
So what is that message, since we brought up the fact that individuals, people could see that this is going to take a longer period of time than maybe the expectation is. So what would your message be to HR leaders and or the hiring manager around the fact that this is going to take time? What would
Right.
you say to them to make sure
Now,
they understand and they don't just write it off too soon before the client gets the benefit?
so think, really think, how much do you want to change? How much do you want what you think you can get that you don't have now? And how much do you want to get out of that negativity? Because you might want to get out of it. You might want to change a little, or you might want to change more, or you might want to change a lot. And there's a difference between all of those things. So if I want to change a lot and I know that there's a big issue and Debbie told me this and I don't like it, but I'm going to do it, that means that they want to change a lot. And those are very easy people to work with. But if I give them a plan or whatever and they say, well, I just want to do this one area, this other one you told me I could change, but I don't think I really need to do that. I don't think I really want to do that. And then I say, okay. And then I change this one area, helping them with this one area or this one part of their life. And then they say, wow, this is really good. This is really interesting. My life is so much better. Now they're thinking, oh, well, what I thought wasn't an issue before, there's one thing that Debbie told me that she could help me with. I didn't think that was an issue, but now I see, because now my life is completely different just with this one issue that Debbie helped me with. Now I could see that maybe the other ones, a few others or whatever, I can change that. And now my life can be a lot better. So they
Right.
could easily see that if they look, because I give them the whole plan.
But this is what I was trying to get to is the manager could have expectations that these changes that need to be made can happen in a very short period of time, so they don't have to make a big financial investment. But yet you find that, well, no, this is going to take time and patience. And I was looking for what message you might give a hiring manager or the HR person who hires you around the fact that they need to be patient and they need to understand that people don't change that quickly.
Here's another way of explaining that I don't know how long something like that will take. And I can help the employees to change quickly, okay? And to change slowly or whatever. Depends on what the situation is. And what you're saying is a very common example. I want them to know that I can definitely help with whatever they think that they have an issue with. Maybe people are getting fired. Well, that's not the employees, that's the executive. That's
Right.
why people are getting fired. Maybe people are quitting. Well, that's not the employees, that's the executive.
And so, what is the poor behavior that you find creates the biggest resistance for the leaders that you work with?
Control and manipulation. And if they have a board, their stocks go up and their sales increase and they're making a lot of money. And that is a great thing. And everybody's really happy. And then one year, it doesn't happen. It goes downhill. Now, boss is blaming the employees, but it's really the boss is the one that changed their behavior to make
Right.
sales decrease or whatever. Then the boss tries to control all of the employees because he wants them to work like they had worked, which they really didn't change. Okay. So, but he sees it as that. He sees that as a perception and he wants them to change because he wants the sales and profits again. So he starts to control. And with that comes manipulation. And I just want to let everybody know that when you sign a contract with a job, you have job duties, whether it's verbal or written down or whatever it is. Okay. And the boss or the executive needs to stick by those job duties. So if they ask you to work late, then they should pay you. If my job duty is I work from 9 to 5, then don't ask me to work till 5:15. And you need to pay me for that 15 minutes. And I teach this stuff a lot because this is what happens. And then bosses get upset and then they have an argument, and then the employee gets fired. Different things, but they want to be able to control the employees. For I just gave one example. I mean, there's 100 different reasons why.
And what have you seen to be the ultimate impact as a result of that control and manipulation? How does the employees respond? How does the business respond?
So then the business is going to tank.
Okay.
If
And
everybody's controlling and manipulating, it's going to go bankrupt. Employees are going to start to quit.
how do you get someone who is controlling and manipulating to see that in themselves?
That's the big question of the century, because we don't know if I can try to help the person. I can give them a plan. I could give them a few sessions. I could tell them all this stuff that I know that's going to happen, but we don't know if that person is really going to accept that and is really going to say or work on blind faith and say, maybe I'll try this. I don't really believe it. I think it's ridiculous and I don't think I'm controlling, but maybe I'll try it or not.
How do you get them to see themselves truly, whether that's through a 360 assessment, whether that's through doing focus groups with their employees? What further steps would you take if these things do exist? They're not seeing it themselves, lack of self-awareness. Are there those type of steps that you would take to help that individual see the reality of things?
That is the assessment. There's a lot of stuff. It's not just I give them a piece of paper. There's a lot of stuff that I say that's going to help them, and I'll try to talk to them as much as I can. If they want to do a workshop, which maybe I would suggest, it really depends on the situation, the company, how many employees they have or whatever. And if they say, oh, it's the employee's problem and they want to do a workshop, then that's fine. I'm willing to work with them if the business owner or executive doesn't want to see that the problem is basically within them. And if whatever I need to do to convince them, I will. But it really comes down to I give them the information and then they decide if they want to do it or not, because that is a mental decision that they have to make. And I could do all the different things to try to convince them and workshops and all kinds of stuff. And 9 times out of 10, that's not going to do anything because they have to go through their process to make a decision within themselves to take one step, change one thing. Person will say, oh, my employees, and that's all that they blame it on. And then I might say, okay, do you want to have a conference call with the employees? Now I could easily convince them that the employees are not the problem, that the business owner needs to look at themselves from that conference call. But it still goes back to, is the business owner going to really want to do it? Are they really going to want help? Everybody has to answer to the employees. Everybody has to make their employees happy. I understand totally what you're saying.
That's a nice to have, is that they have to answer to the janitor or to their employees. But the reality is, if they were to decide that they don't have anything to work on and they don't have anyone else that they're responsible to,
Right.
not for, but to, then they can, like you said, decide there's nothing that I need to work on and we don't need to do anything. Whereas in other structures, such as corporate or even mid-sized companies that have a boss, that have a leadership team, that have an HR department, that could also be driving this requirement for them to get this type of support, that's where the dynamic that I'm trying to understand, that even if you have a very resistant client, they have to answer to the goals and expectations and the objectives that their bosses, HR, or others have of them. And therefore, they don't have a choice to say, no, I'm not going to do any work.
They don't have anybody to answer to, but here's the thing. Their sales and profits are going to decrease because of their behavior. Why?
Right.
Because they're not treating the employees. They're controlling and manipulating the employees. They're creating fear. Okay. They're creating anger. And now their employees they have a high turnover, or they have no employees, or they have 2 and they're supposed to have 15. And even if you're an executive, it's still the same thing. Yeah, you have people that are higher up to answer to, but it's still the same thing. If everything was fine, they wouldn't be saying to the executive, oh, you need to change this and this. It all goes back to that. There's tons of other reasons and explanations and all that stuff, but it really comes down to, how is the business operating? every day. I change myself. I change my thinking. I change my behavior. That changes my actions. And when that happens, everybody around me changes. Doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what your career is or the name of your position or whatever. And then everybody around me changes. And that is how I create a positive environment. And I do this with work and with home. Then everything changes. And guess what happens then? The sales and profits go through the roof. They don't increase a little bit.
Where does accountability fit into this? Where, as far as a behavior, control and manipulation is pretty is a pretty rough one, as far as that's just something that's going to have a horrible effect on the culture of the company. How about, where does accountability or lack thereof? What do you see when it comes to that behavior in executives?
Accountability for the executive would be that they should realize that they really need to do something, and not only realize it and think it, they need to actually take the action to do things that they don't want to do. And then the person, the higher up or their boss or their board members is going to say, you are not changing. Okay. So we need to hold you accountable. Okay. Because you said that you were going to get help and all this stuff, and nothing's really happening. So therefore, you might be demoted or something like that. And that kind of fear, quote unquote, is a way, as not something that is going to happen in every situation, but this that thing that they boss or whatever tells them, or the board members or whoever, now they're holding the person, the executive, accountable, because now the executive has to rethink, because they don't know that they're not changing, but they need other people to see that. This is extremely common, extremely.
And
Okay.
how do you help them see that they're not changing? What kind of tools, or what do you use in order to help someone see that, you know what, in the 2 months, 3 months, 6 months that we've been
Yeah.
working together, you're not changing? How do you help them with that?
I tell them.
When
Work.
you're not living with them, you're not seeing them on a day in, day out basis. So what kind of evidence or receipts would you be able to show them that on a day in, day out basis, you're not changing? How would you discover that?
I don't need to see them every day. If they have a session and we've learned something in the last 5 sessions, and sometimes I give homework, I tell them to practice this and that, and then we have another session a week later, then I could see it right away. And then I would tell them. I might not say it's changing, but I would say, did you, sometimes I put a lot of things in the form of a question. Did you act on this behavior, that behavior? Did you find something that was negative and turned it into a positive? I'm just giving something general. I would say the specific thing. And then if they don't do what is suggested, you talk about this, we go over it, and then you do it, and then this should be the result. And then each thing is worked separately like that. And you would see results right away. And if they're not working, they're not changing, then do you really want to move on?
How involved do you get with their employees, their team members, and or even their boss and other stakeholders? Do you involve them in understanding what and how they might be changing or not?
That depends on what the client's process is. If they say that they want that, then it really depends on a lot of things, then that's fine with me.
If you were to recommend to our listeners or our viewers one thing that they could be doing for themselves when it comes to really understanding and differentiating between how they're behaving and showing up and their personality, so they can really see the impact and the experience that they're creating for everyone around them and even for themselves, what would that one tip or piece of advice be?
One thing they could do is they could take their own inventory. So what they would do is they would go through their day. They could just put it on their phone, or they could go through the day, and then at night they would take a piece of paper or computer or however they're going to do it. And then they would make a chart, negative and positive. And then they would write all the things down that they did, everything they could think of, what their employees did, what they did, how they acted, all things that happened, anything they could think of. And is that thing negative or positive? Okay. Or they could just write it out and say, write negative after it, after the sentence or whatever. Okay. And when they do that, then what's going to happen? Hopefully they'll see, most likely they're going to have more negatives than positives. And if they have more positives, then they don't need help. You know what I mean? But if they see that there's a lot of negatives, then they might do an inventory for a few days or a week or whatever. And then they see, but you would need to do it consistently every night. And then they would see that, wow, there's a lot of negative things here. And maybe if I change these things, I have all these problems. I have problems at home. I have problems at work. I'm an executive or a manager. I have employees quitting. I'm arguing with my spouse, with my children, all these different things. And then when I do that and I see all the negatives and I see there's a lot of situations, if you've been justifying it for 20 years, then it's going to be very, very difficult for you to see that, because all you're doing is compounding excuses on top of excuses, negativity on top of negativity. And then it's really, really difficult just to get down to the core of what you need to do to change and what that's going to look like.
Think about leveraging a coach that can really help them get through the muckety muck, as I call it, and make all those changes and change all aspects of their life, like you mentioned. Awesome. That was the cream of the crop, people, and take an inventory. I love it. Debbie, thank you so much. I appreciate it. But before she goes, I want to make sure all of you go to DebbieLongo.com. That's LONGO.com. You can also link in with her at Debbie Longo. And I'm going to also put a number of links in the show notes that talks about her podcast and her Facebook page and all of her other social handles, so you can get a hold of her there. Debbie, thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I had a great time.
One of the biggest takeaways from today's discussion is the fact that leadership isn't defined by intentions. It's defined by your behaviors and the behaviors your team experiences every single day. The good news is that behaviors can be recognized, adjusted, and strengthened, creating a ripple effect that improves communication, trust, accountability, and ultimately business results. And that's what we all want. If today's conversation challenged you to think differently about how you lead, then don't let it stop here. Take a few minutes today and honestly ask yourself, what behavior am I consistently demonstrating that may be creating resistance instead of engagement? That single question could change the trajectory of your leadership. If you found value in this episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation designed to help you become a better leader. You can go to balloffirecoaching.com/podcast and follow us on our ShedtheCorpBitchTV YouTube channel. Finally, remember this: leadership isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming more intentional about the behaviors you choose every day. I'll look forward to having you for another episode of Shedding the Corporate Bitch.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Shedding the Corporate Bitch. Don't miss any of our weekly episodes. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you love to listen. And for those who thrive on visual content, catch us on our Shedding the Bitch YouTube channel. Want to dive deeper with Bernadette on becoming a powerhouse leader? Visit balloffirecoaching.com to learn more about how she helps professionals, HR executives, and team leaders elevate overall team performance. You've been listening to Shedding the Corporate Bitch with Bernadette Boas. Until next time, keep shedding, keep growing, and keep leading.